at all these slave masters posing on your dollar.
I wrote this script last year and never finished it, so I apologize for the outdated content. However, the debate between Beto and Cruz helps me set up a continued conversation on police brutality that has resulted in our current political climate. So, enjoy. After watching the first Beto-Cruz debate, I realized there was something else about the conversation on police brutality that I wanted to address. This comes from the perspective of the citizen. I talked a lot about how we can change or transform policing in my video on the history of policing, but that's only one part of the equation. Citizens also need to change how they view and think about police officers in order to create the type of change we demand. The first thing I'd like to address is the rhetoric surrounding the support of law enforcement.
Troubling pattern. Over and over again, Congressman O'Rourke, when faced with an issue about police and law enforcement, he sides against the police. So in the United States Congress, he voted against allowing funds to go to body armor for sheriffs. When it comes to immigration and customs enforcement, he has said he's open to abolishing that law enforcement agency. And just this week, Congressman O'Rourke described law enforcement, described police officers as modern-day Jim Crow. Let me say something. I have gotten to know police officers all across this state. That is offensive. Just today, Fort Worth is burying Officer Garrett Hall with his wife Sabrina and 2 kids who was shot in the head risking his life. Here today, Officer Brian Graham, an Arlington SWAT officer who was shot in the head. He is here, and everyday police officers risk their lives for us. Officer Graham is standing there, his 2 kids. He took a bullet in the head protecting us. And let me say right now, I think it is offensive to call police officers modern-day Jim Crow. That is not Texas.
Cruz begins his answer with Beto as him always siding against police officers. To be honest, that isn't always a bad thing, especially if police officers are continually on the wrong side of justice. Not the law, but what is just. Cruz's rhetoric does a great job at trying to paint police officers as one of us. That they're just regular citizens, that they have no extra power or privileges bestowed upon them. Police officers are not one of us. They are separate from the citizen class. They have the power to take your life away and to lock you in a cage until your trial. Let's not forget this. They are a part of a class that protects the status quo and upholds the establishment in general. I'm not saying that these are bad things, but they are the enforcement arm of those who control power. But the rest of his statement is just straight up virtue signaling and pandering to his audience. He frames the conversation by equating Beto to being against law enforcement or against law and order in general. He brings up the sacrifices of police officers to make an appeal to emotion. Yes, those officers were either killed in the line of duty or injured while doing so, and they deserve some recognition and respect. But their actions don't account for the entirety of the police profession. Just because they have performed their jobs honorably does not mean that exonerates the rest of law enforcement of their faults. You can be supportive of a thing and be critical of it. Blind faith in something isn't what we should be applauding. That type of behavior needs to be criticized because it turns a blind eye towards the principles of justice and truth. I think when we have this conversation about how many unarmed people are killed by police officers, we run into some problems with data. See, law enforcement is incredibly localized. There is no federal law enforcement agency in control of police departments. Each one department is accountable to itself. When we look at the whole of police killings in America, we only see what is reported. Not all police departments are required to report this information. We only see what police officers have individually reported as well. All of this requires that officers are honest and report everything that happens. Police officers are human beings and can be influenced to do the wrong thing or to lie. So keep that in mind when you hear about data on crimes. These are only the reported ones that an officer cared enough to write up and submit. Think about how many incidences didn't get reported or were intentionally misreported, like an accidental death versus a murder, or legitimate use of self-defense versus trigger-happy. There is some credibility to Beto's claim about black people being disproportionately killed. When you look at mappingpoliceviolence.org, they have a chart that shows rates of police killings by state, broken down by race. The chart currently lists all reported police officer killings from January 2013 through December 2017. When you look at the places with the highest police killings, Black make up many of their numbers. Hispanics are also included in the white metric, so this skews the appearance of the bar representing white deaths compared to the bar representing Black deaths. In the states where many deaths are Black people, the majority race of the population is white. According to 2017 estimates from the Census Bureau, Utah is 90% white and 1.4% Black. Alaska is 65% white and 3.7% Black. West Virginia is 93% white and 3.6% Black. Oklahoma is 74% white and 7.8% Black. And Nebraska is 88% white and 5% Black. Now, these are the raw numbers without adding much critical analysis. They're just stats. I'm not controlling for urban versus rural, crime or population density, poverty, or anything else that can contribute to the disproportionate numbers. Regardless, the data presents a problem. In states with over 90% white people, Blacks are disproportionately killed by police officers. Does this mean Black people just commit more crime in these areas and white people are law-abiding citizens? Maybe, but I highly doubt that. If that is true, then we should be looking at ways to reduce that number. We should be looking at the problems facing the Black community and trying to make it better. If the numbers don't represent a racial prejudice or bias, then we need to understand that. If not, then we're wrongly placing the blame on law enforcement and the system. But let's look at the claim that Black people commit more crime in the state of Utah. Like I said earlier, Utah is 90% white and 1.4% Black. From the data about deaths, Utah police officers killed Black people substantially more. Well, do Black people commit more crime than white people? According to Utah's crime statistics for 2017 on arrests by race, 29,165 white people were arrested as compared to 2,070 Black people. So white people are arrested for way more crime than Black people. Though if you're just looking solely at race as a proportion, 7% of Black people were arrested for crimes versus 1.2% of white people. We don't know if bias, prejudice, or an increase of policing in one area led to the higher rate. It could just be that police officers were less likely to charge a white person versus a Black person. It could be one's access to better public defenders or private counsel. It could be that since Hispanics are counted in the white category for one dataset and not in the overall racial makeup of the Utah dataset, that it skews the results in either direction. Could the 9% poverty and that only 60% of the civilian workforce aged 16 and older is employed contribute to the disparity of crime rates? It's complicated. I know 7% versus 1.2% may seem like a huge statistical difference, but for total arrests being 37,084, white people committed 79% of the total crimes versus Blacks at 6%. Now, I just chose one white majority state and found what information I could. From that information, the idea that Blacks just commit more crime and therefore are killed by police more doesn't hold true for total arrests in Utah. It's only when you compare the size of the population's demographic that it seems like Black people commit so much more crime. Also, let me remind you that in our country, you're innocent until proven guilty. So these individuals were killed before they could be charged or committed. Dead people can't defend themselves, and they can't tell their side of the story. However, it is the way that we frame the conversation.
A quick follow-up to you, Senator Cruz. Do you agree that police violence against unarmed African Americans is a problem? And if so, how would you fix it?
See, the question is part of the problem. From the data above, we can see that whites, Hispanics, and Blacks are all killed unarmed by police officers. This question allows Cruz to hide behind the rhetoric of bringing us together than dividing us. It sets him up to pander to his base. The question should have been, do you believe police violence against unarmed citizens is a problem? By asking this question, it puts Cruz in the position of creating a divide between those who have power and those who don't. He can't sit there and say that he just wants to view all people not by their skin color or background, like he did here.
Everyone's rights should be protected, regardless of your race, regardless of your ethnicity. But I'll tell you something.
You shut this defense down and force him to answer the underlying question of police brutality.
Dallas, when 5 police officers were gunned down because of irresponsible and hateful rhetoric. I was at the funeral in Houston at Second Baptist Church where Deputy Goforth had been shot in the back of the head at a service station because of irresponsible and hateful rhetoric. Just now, Congressman O'Rourke repeated things he knows aren't true. He stated, for example, white police officers are shooting unarmed African-American children. The Washington Post fact-checked that claim and conclude Congressman O'Rourke was wrong, but
All right, well, let's stop and fact-check Cruz. I looked up the actual article he recites, and Cruz is misleading his audience. Here, he's using the Washington Post because it's viewed as liberal, thus attacking Beto with a liberal source. However, the Washington Post didn't say he was wrong at all. Here's Beto's original statement. Black men, unarmed, black teenagers, unarmed, and black children, unarmed, are being killed at a frightening level right now, including by members of law enforcement without accountability and without justice. The Washington Post said this regarding his claim, the Pinocchio test. There's little question the black community faces extraordinary levels of violence, but whether O'Rourke's statement qualifies as Pinocchio or Geppetto worthy depends on how you hear it. There have been virtually no shootings of unarmed black children by police in the past 5 years, but hundreds of black children have been homicide victims. Given the varying interpretations of O'Rourke's statement, we won't offer a rating, but readers are welcome to provide their own judgment below. Beto's statement is vague, and it leaves a lot of room for interpretation. Blacks in general are being killed at an alarming rate. Are they solely being killed by police officers? No, but that's not what Beto said either. Also, if you watched my first video, you would know police rarely ever face justice for their actions, so the latter part of his statement has some truth in it.
tell you something, that rhetoric does damage. That rhetoric divides us on race. It inflames hatred. We should be bringing people together instead of suggesting the police are risking their lives to protect all of us, to protect African Americans, to protect Hispanics, and turning people against the police, I think is profoundly irresponsible.
This is why people don't like Washington, D.C. You just said something that I did not say.
What did you not say?
Attributed it to me.
Here, Beto called him out for lying, but Cruz's supporters are just not going to care. However, do you see how Cruz pivots from talking about police violence to the virtue signaling of police officers? He talks about all the officers that have died from hateful rhetoric and speaks nothing about the victims of police brutality. He completely avoids answering the real question because of the way it was asked. We are shooting ourselves in the foot with our framing of the data. Let's look at the number of deaths of officers over the years. According to odmp.org, if you add up gunfire deaths and vehicular assault, the other categories down apply to criminal actions. 2012 is 60 deaths, 2013 is 40 deaths, 2014 is 59 deaths, 2015 is 51 deaths, 2016 is 78 deaths, 2017 is 51 deaths, 2018 is 61 deaths, and 2019 is 55 deaths. 455 officers have died over the last 8 years due to something that isn't accidental or health related. According to mappingpoliceviolence.org, police killed 1,098 people in 2019 alone. 455 deaths in 8 years to 1,098 in 1 year. Think about the numbers and the proportionality. Hell, when looking through the data, I saw heart attacks killed just as many officers as gunfire did in some years. So should we say that food is targeting cops too? However, these tactics of police supporters are what continues this problem. We can't ever actually talk about the issue of police brutality because it is always sidestepped through virtual signaling or appealing to one's emotions. We need to stop this rhetoric and shut it down. We need to be critical of our law enforcement no matter how much we support them. From the perspective of someone who gives a fuck, you should want criticism in order to improve. You shouldn't want to shield yourself from it. It's the same tactic the religious right uses when their religion is questioned. They shield it from criticism. They feel the perceived value of good that it produces protects it from any justified criticism. It's funny that these same people will be incredibly critical towards the government but not apply that same criticism anywhere else. They unapologetically latch on to the virtues of individual sacrifice. It's okay to be a police officer, a soldier, or a firefighter and risk your life for the greater good. It's noble but God forbid if you have to pay some taxes in order to provide for the greater good, or to protect the environment through regulation for the greater good, or use any other form of collectivism in order to contribute to the greater good. Very few individuals are against law enforcement in some form. The broad strokes of calling anyone on the left who dares to mutter any criticism of policing in America as anti-law is creating an environment that leads to inactivity. It's creating the future victims of police brutality today. We need to find a way to talk about this issue without it developing into a virtue signaling wrestling match. Yeah, I get it. You stand for law and order and it's a part of your identity. It makes you feel like you're a part of something and that you're better than others. I get it, but we cannot keep going down this road. Too many lives are on the line to be complacent here. On a side note, the rhetoric surrounding police officers can also be seen at how Trump's base talks about him. Most of these people are deeply religious and seek to find strong people to lead them. They praise Trump in the same manner they praise police officers. They idolize what they can do and what they have become. They throw their unwavering support behind the person who holds all these characteristics they can't manifest in themselves. That, or in the confines of Christianity, obedience to those who protect you is a basic tenet. Being a servant is how to please God, and those leaders were selected and chosen by God in order to advance His word. So when you disobey leaders above you, you also disobey God. Unless you're Obama, because fuck that black guy, right? As citizens, we also need to take a look at how we interact with police officers. How the person behaves will incite a reaction from the officer. Officers are trained to pick up on certain behaviors as being suspicious. Not to try and catch criminal activity per se, but to also make sure the police officer's life is relatively safe. We as citizens need to understand this. Police officers deal with incredibly harmful and terrible situations on an almost daily basis. This doesn't mean we shouldn't hold them accountable. When someone is in constant fear of their life, it has dramatic effects on that person's ability to handle situations. This is referred to as predatory death anxiety and is explained by Robert Lang in his paper called Unconscious Death Anxiety and the Two Modes of Psychotherapy. He describes it as the fear of harm from other living beings, especially other humans, and from natural disasters. The archetypal response entails a natural tendency to overreact to threat and an inclination to attack before being attacked. This fear activates the human's fight or flight response system. Many police officers suffer from this condition and it goes untreated. While their fear may be justified in many instances, it does have a major impact on how the officer reacts to situations. So we as citizens need to try and make our experience with police officers as non-threatening and as stressless as possible. This must also apply vice versa with the police and citizens. We need to respect that they're doing a job that we have given them previous authority to do, and until we take that authority away, they have complete authority over every situation. The best possible action is to remain compliant and not to overreact. We don't need to provoke their insecurities or try to assert our individual free will over them. Just do as asked. Even if you disagree with the situation, you will have your chance in court to defend yourself. That's the entire reason of the justice system. You are innocent until proven guilty in a court of law. Take advantage of that and do not try to provoke the situation even more. What is more important, your life or this trivial matter in front of you? Hopefully, it's your life. And I agree, overall, it's a shitty situation. I had to learn this lesson in the military the hard way. I got into a disagreement with the senior NCO who was clearly in the wrong, but I chose to disobey his orders and threaten him. Even though I was in the right, my actions led me to getting into more trouble. Had I just followed instructions and brought up my complaints later, the situation would have turned out different. There is a time and place for everything. Pick your battles wisely because you may end up losing your life over something incredibly trivial. And I understand that when you do everything that is asked of you, you may still get harmed. And I'm not talking about these situations. I'm just speaking generally. I know that these points will not always work. However, we can at least try. Many police officers don't want problems. They just want to do their job and move along just as you do. They want to keep paperwork to a minimum so that they can spend their time away from work. I do believe that many signed up to do good things, to protect their community and to be called upon when others need. They are human beings as well with lives outside of that uniform. We need to treat them as such. I see a lot of videos of people provoking police officers, and while I disagree with the police officers retaliating, these people kind of get what they deserve. They look to get a response, and a response they got. It reminds me of the saying in the military, play stupid games and win stupid prizes. And I agree that police officers are and should always be servants to the people. This should be the bedrock of policing. With almost unlimited authority comes great responsibility. The use of that authority should always be scrutinized and criticized whenever a police officer uses it. This is not only to protect citizens from abuse, but also protects the police from corruption. Making sure that they're held accountable no matter their status helps provide an environment that encourages officers to root out their own corruption. A system of accountability arises from within the brotherhood. However, this can't happen if 1, we don't hold them accountable, and 2, the public at large continues to attack the lot of them for a few bad apples. Attacking all police officers creates an us versus them mentality and pushes police officers to create this unbreakable brotherhood. If no one else will stand up for them, they're going to create their own network that will, a network that is not accountable to whom they serve. In addition, we as the public must let justice ride out. Prime example is Trump's recent interference with the military justice system. We can draw a lot of similarities to how Republicans revere the military and how they revere police officers. In the case of Chief Petty Officer Edward Gallagher, he was charged with 7 charges ranging from murder to posing with a dead body. He was acquitted of all of them except one, the posing with a dead body. He was sentenced to 4 months in prison and was to be demoted 1 rank. However, President Trump then stepped into the ring to add his 2 cents. He directed the Secretary of the Navy to revoke Navy achievement medals given to the members of the prosecution team. He then declared that Gallagher's demotion would be reversed. The move also included several other military members accused of misconduct. In addition to Gallagher, Lieutenant Clint Lawrence was ordered freed, and the prosecution of Matthew Goldstein was ordered to be ended. This prompted a UN spokesperson to state that these pardons sent a troubling signal to militaries, and the failure to investigate war crimes is itself a violation of international humanitarian law. The public's opinion in this case is in direct conflict with the system of accountability. Trump's actions directly influence and perpetuate behavior that can be harmful to national security and our troops overseas. Not holding our military members accountable for their actions set a precedent that anything is tolerated if you are on the winning side. It not only hurts our credibility on the international stage, but also the credibility of the military's honor. I know some people will take this as apologetics towards police officers, but I'm speaking from the point of view that we're all human beings. We should respect each other. We should understand that we all have bad days, and that sometimes kindness makes a huge difference. Of course, an officer having a bad day does not justify one killing a civilian, but we should understand that police officers are human beings. They feel the stresses of capitalism and class struggle just as we do. They deal with long-hour shifts and personnel shortages. We cannot simply wave their actual good deeds away for the sake of making an argument. As much as we don't like to admit, they do play a pivotal role in the justice system and helping maintain public safety. With all the recent demonstrations over George Floyd's death and other cases of injustice, we need to make sure our message remains clear and concise. I was in a conversation with an individual on the right. The conversation was initially combative until I kept hitting the basic issue that when a police officer kills a suspect, that suspect's constitutional rights are being taken away from them without due process. We began talking about the Rayshard Brooks case, and initially he was trying to justify his death, but I kept pointing out that regardless of his behavior, which no one condones, that shouldn't have been punishable by death. He tried to say the taser was a weapon, and I replied with, if that's that scary, why do police officers use it as non-lethal force on citizens? He then kept trying to bring up how cops are in emotional situations, and I said that I understood that with my time in combat, but I never took someone's life because of that. I brought up that if we could apply that to cops, why not a man who shoots his wife over a heated argument? He could just say he acted on emotion in the same manner, and since he's the survivor, the victim can't do anything. By the end of the exchange, he agreed that maybe death wasn't the punishment he deserved, or any of them. I didn't bring up BLM or state that cops are racist. Those would have automatically put him in a defensive mode and shut down the conversation. I'm not saying that those things don't have any truth to them, but they turn people off who are not ready to have those conversations. I got him to agree with the basic premise of justice, which is what we should all be aiming for. Our messaging overall may not be wrong. However, it isn't effective at bringing people over to our movement. The messaging and the rhetoric are incredibly important. This is how Trump has kept such a fervent base. Much of what he says may not be true, but it is simple enough that people can get behind it. We can keep truth in our message, but craft it to where it's inviting to all. We should focus on the idea that police officers are denying people's constitutional rights by killing them. They can relate to this message because they always feel their Second Amendment rights are being infringed. If they disagree on this point, then we point out the fundamental problem in their belief system, that they must have their constitutional rights, but everybody else's is not that important. We're not going to fix the institution of policing overnight. Hell, it's more than just the institution itself. We also have this gross culture built around law and order that paints it all in black and white. But black and white is a fallacy. On top of that, the religious have successfully tied being police officers as a calling from God to fight good and evil. I know you've seen the yard signs with the Bible quote, "Blessed are the peacekeepers, for they will be called children of God," underneath a thin blue line American flag. This tying of religion and law and order predates back to the birth of the KKK. How is it almost everything religion touches, it creates fanatics and introduces moral rot? This is the culture that we're fighting, because fighting the institution of policing is apparently fighting the children of God. Yes, even the persecution of Christians can be found here. Do Black Lives Matter? Fuck yes. Do Blue Lives Matter? Of course. But you know what doesn't matter? Writing a bad check for $20, selling single squares, or driving with the taillight out. Those things don't matter enough to be harassed and then killed over. That is the point. Like, share, and subscribe if you like my shit, and let's start a conversation in the comments. Till later, stay safe, guys.